Since I've become an adult, the word community has become in vogue. It's a fashionable word that we use these days. When I was growing up, the word community primarily was a reference to place or people. So we would say something like, I live in the Tuscaloosa community, right? But in recent days, really in the last 25 years, it's taken on a different kind of meaning. It has less to do with people and place. And it's now just a prefix for other things. So we say things like the teachers community, or a CrossFit community, or the university community, or community leaders. And so community has sort of gotten diluted, and it can mean all sorts of things. And even so, like when you're going online and you go to a company's website, and there'll be a pop-up and it'll say, welcome to our online community, or you're on your Starbucks app and you're ordering your latte for pickup, and it'll say, we're so glad you're part of the Starbucks community, right? And yet deep down, no matter where you are in the spiritual journey today, whether you are passionate about Jesus, you're just coming back from the mission field, or you're here today and you're just investigating what it means to follow Jesus, here's what I know about every one of us. All of us know that there is something more for us when it comes to relationships. There is something deep inside of us that is this longing for a relationship or multiple relationships that have substance. And we know that if a relationship is predicated on being a customer or sitting behind a screen, then it's not really community. In fact, Solomon, thousands of years before today, in the book of Ecclesiastes, he says that God has put eternity in the hearts of men and women. And yet he says, yet they cannot fathom what he's done since the beginning. Meaning there is the seed of eternity, the seed of relationship with God and deep relationship with other people. That every one of us, no matter where you are on the spiritual spectrum, every one of us know there's something more, some longing in our heart for a relationship that matters, a relationship that is going to point us to a kind of eternal substance in our life. And unsurprisingly, the Bible talks a lot about this idea. In fact, Jonathan Haidt, who ironically is not a Christian, he has written this book. He's a sociologist, a researcher at New York University. Just love him so much. He's written this book and this idea called the hive switch. Anybody ever read the hive switch? Amazing. Okay, well, you're going to love it, okay? And the hive switch is basically this idea, and he says that everybody on the planet is essentially a chimpanzee. He's like, everybody just wants to get what they want. Everybody longs to have what they want, no matter what they want, and no matter what everybody else wants, they're going to get what they want. And if we don't get what we want, then we're just going to throw our feces at each other, right? And he says, but there is an opportunity in the scope of every human's life where we can move from a chimp to a bee. That's why he calls it the hive switch. And so it's this idea that every one of us, naturally, we are individuals. We are going to get what we want. We have ambition. We have our own desires. And we're going to do whatever it takes to get what we want. But there's this event that can happen in your life that can move you from an individual to put you into a community where you're like, it's not really about me. It's not actually about my agenda. It's actually about what we're doing. It's about where we're going as a people. And it's not to say that you lose your identity, but your identity actually comes more alive in a larger community. And Jonathan Haidt, who, again, is not a Christian, he's like, there are these events just based on data that will flip that switch. One of those events, as you'd imagine, would be being on a competitive team together. And it's not like Little League. He's like a varsity team or a college athletic team or a professional team. There's something where you realize, okay, it's not really about me. It's about this larger ethos that we're doing together. He says national tragedy will also do that. So if you're old enough to remember September 11th, we found ourselves united with people that we never would have been united with based on our interests, but now we find ourselves united in a kind of commonality and a mission based on something that's happened externally. And then this is the most profound. He's like, and again, in all of his writings, he's like, I'm not a Christian. He's an atheist. He's like, but just the data is so profound and so much of it. He's like, the one the one thing that again and again and again will flip the switch from individuality to a community is when you attend regularly of a worship gathering just like this, where there is something that happens deep inside of a person's soul where they recognize it's not about me. My life is not about my individual ambitions or desires. It's actually about something larger in a community of faith. And as I mentioned, this is not a new idea. This goes all the way back in the New Testament. And there's a word in particular that the New Testament writers use again and again. In the Greek, it's this word called koinonia. And if you've grown up in church or in light of stained glass, you've probably heard that word. And we usually dumb it down to translate it as fellowship. Anybody ever heard that word being translated as fellowship? And that can be a way to translate it. A more accurate way to translate koinonia, it just simply means common. It means commonality. It means a kind of togetherness. And the reason that matters is because when we talk about community today, there's never going to be a question in your mind that when you see real community, even if you're not a Christian, if you've seen real community, there's never the time where you go, is it good? You're always going to go, of course, that is good, because you know you're longing for it. It's possible, and at the very least, if it's not possible, maybe it's plausible. And so you see it happen, and you go, it is good. You're never going to question that. But one of the things you are going to think about when you see community, especially when you're not in it, is you're going to go, how in the world is something so plain, something so common as that, like where people are just doing life together, where they're just eating meals together, where they're raising children together, where they're learning to fight together and love together and forgive. Like it's so vanilla in the scope of life, and yet it feels like the breath of God is on that. You look at it and go, how in the world can something so plain, something so common be so profound? So we're not asking, is it good? But here's what we're all asking, especially if you're not in community, is we're asking, how do I get in it? Like, how do I step into something that is transformative for life? And again, the great news, the Bible talks quite a bit about this. And we're in this series, if you're new to Hope City, we started last weekend, where we're zoning in on the Church of Antioch. And I love the Church of Antioch. I hope you're learning to love the Church of Antioch. And what we're doing is we are highlighting some of the praiseworthy qualities of the Church of Antioch. And if you've been part of church, you already know this. There is no perfect church. Every church has its own version of dumpster fire, and Antioch has their own dumpster fire qualities. But there are some things that are so powerful that I want us to, these next 4 weeks or these next 3 weeks, we're going to celebrate. And as we celebrate them, my hope is we can look at them and go, not only is what they do and who they are something that is attainable for us, but also is something that's reproducible for us. And so last weekend, we highlighted the fact that they were this forerunner for racial and ethnic diversity. And we are making no bones about it. We are putting so much energy and prayer and movement towards you and I becoming a greater ethnic and racial community here in our city. And then the second thing we see in the Church of Antioch is they're really serious about relationship. They're deadly serious about doing life together in every facet of life. And so I want to spend our time today in Acts chapter 15. And again, if you're new around here, this series mostly is going to be in Acts 15. We're going to be a little bit in Acts 11, a little bit in Acts 13 as well. But today, just Acts 15. And I want to drill down on just a few thoughts, and we'll try to elevate these to where we live. The first thought is simply this about the Church of Antioch and community is simply this, is that I want us to drill down that community has got to be, true community, the kind of community we're talking about, has got to be rooted in Jesus. And I know some of you are like, duh, right? I mean, like that's because we're in church. You'd expect me to say that. But what I mean by that is the community we're talking about has got to be rooted in his sufficiency, that he's enough, that he has power to heal and heal relationships, and then to sustain us in trouble. So let me show you what I mean. Go to Acts 15, beginning with verse 1. And by the time this series is over, you're going to be very familiar with Acts 15 because we just read it every week. We just walk through it every week and look at different things. But Acts 15, verse 1, he says this: "But some men came down from Judea and were teaching the brothers, Unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. And then go down to verse 6. The apostles and the elders were gathered together to consider this matter, and after there had been much debate, Peter stood up and said to them, "Brothers, you know that in the early days God made a choice among you that by my mouth the Gentiles should hear the word of the gospel and believe." And what's it say? And God, who knows the heart, bore witness to them by giving them the Holy Spirit, just as he did to us. And he made no distinction between us and them, having cleansed their hearts by faith. Okay, so here's what's happening. You got this church, this family coming together that is so incredibly diverse. And that's really what we talked about last week. And so you got every tongue, tribe, language, nation. You got different colors, you got different ethnicities, backgrounds, economics, and all these different people are coming together in a family, and what binds them together in the family are not their similarities. What binds them together is the unity of the Spirit of Christ. And I would contend that the thing that is going to unify us is going to be the same thing. As we grow in greater diversity in age and demographic and color and background, the thing that will unite us are not the similarities that we can distill down, but by the unity of heaven on our house. That's what's going to unify. So let me say it this way, and maybe if I can flip it on its head. The question we have to ask is, what has happened to us? And then what do we do with what has happened to us? Let me say it maybe even a different way. The common denominator for everybody in the room today and the people watching online, the common denominator is that every one of us are broken. Make no mistake, everybody is fractured. Everybody has massive pain points and maybe a little bit of trauma. All of us have some dark spots in our life in which we're unable to see our way through it. And the only way we get through it is if Jesus then opens our eyes to see that he's beautiful and he is perfect, and his holiness and his grace transforms the entire way that we live our life, the way that we see life, the way that we do relationships. Meaning, when Jesus opens our eyes to see that he was crushed for us on the cross, and in his crushing, it was so that we might be made whole. When we see that, it changes the way that we do life, the way that we behave, the way that we create ambition and dreams over our life. And this is where I'm going. When other people have that same revelation of Jesus, where Jesus has changed everything, where Jesus has given you the mind of heaven, where you begin to not think about building a life in this kingdom, but recognizing that your ultimate citizenship is in another kingdom, when you recognize that that has happened to you and it's happened to some other people in a radical sort of way, you want to be in community with those kinds of people. Because you recognize that the foundation of life has got to be in Jesus. The foundation of life and community cannot be in mutual similarities found in this world. Let me say this in a way that may surprise you. I love the pretext of community. Meaning I love the fact that there are football communities. I really do. I love that there's single mom communities, and I love that there's CrossFit communities. Those are beautiful. I really believe that. I have a little tennis community. Okay, a few days a week, I've got 7, 8, 10 guys that I play tennis with, and we're really serious about it, and I love it. There's some important friendships that have been developed in that little tennis community, but I don't make any illusion to think that is a gospel community that I'm going to build my life in. Meaning, I have more in common with the Sudanese single mom who's had her village burned down, but her treasure is found in Jesus Christ. Way more in common with her than I do with a bunch of white dudes who play tennis, multiple degrees, live in the burbs, but treasure this life above all things. I have way more in common with her. And so when you find yourself building your life on this pretext of I'm in community, but if that community is not built on Jesus being the treasure and the foundation and the ambition for life, it will always fall short. And so the invitation is not more community, the invitation is in the right community. Second idea is simply this, and this may surprise you, but it's just how gracious God is to put us in a family, to put us in community. Like, he doesn't have to do that. I mean, he's not obligated to do anything for us, but the very fact that, like, God is like, I'm going to put you in a family, and that's part of his redemptive purpose over our life. Like, he could have just saved us and zapped us and taken us to heaven, and that would have been fine. He is praiseworthy for all eternity if he does that, but he's like, I'm going to give you an additional gift. I'm going to leave you down here for a little while so that you can learn to enjoy your salvation. And then you can get around some other people and learn to hope with them. And what you're going to find is that those people that you're hoping with, some of those people are going to become more of a family to you than some of your blood family. Let me show you what I mean. Look now at verse 12. It says, all the assembly fell silent. And they listened to Barnabas and Paul as they related what signs and wonders God had done through them among the Gentiles. And after they finished speaking, James replied, brothers, listen to me. Now, I love that phrase, mostly because I say that all the time. I'm always like, hey, look up here. Listen to me. I appreciate that. But why is James being so adamant? Why is he like, hey, listen to me? The reason he's saying that is like, what I'm about to say is the heartbeat of the best news on the planet. And the best news is that God is building a family. And he's building a family of people that don't necessarily look like you. It's people different colors, different backgrounds, different economics, different ethnicities, different tribes. I'm building this family, and what's going to bind the family together is the work of God among the individuals, and the work of God combined together with the power of the Spirit is going to make you into a single family. And so it's unsurprising when you hear that and you read this in Acts 15, it's unsurprising when you open up the rest of the New Testament that family is a pretty significant theme in almost every page of the New Testament. And in which, honestly, it's one of the things I love about our house. Every weekend when I'm walking through the property on Wednesday nights and I'm seeing hundreds of people in community, one of the things that I love is seeing all the multi-generational nature of it. Because it's not just about different colors and different tribes and different ethnicities. It's about different generations coming together and seeing the wisdom of heaven being imparted to each generation. Because each generation brings something valuable and important into the kingdom. And so with that, it's not surprising that in almost every book in the New Testament, this idea of family comes to the surface. Think about Paul in Titus 2. Listen to what he says. He says, older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and in steadfastness. Older women, likewise, are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to too much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled. Let me stop there, because one of the things that I love about this is it reminds me of a guy that I read and I listen to, a guy named Tim Elmore. Anybody? Just alone in this house, okay? Tim Elmore, he's a sociologist, an expert on generations, and he says currently right now there are 7 generations on the planet. And you've got the what's called the silent generation, which those that were part of World War II. And you've got the boomers, and then you've got Gen Xers, which is my generation. Then you've got the Gen Z or the millennials, and then you got the Alpha generation. So you get all these generations, and I don't know if you're paying attention, but there is a sort of an uneasiness among the generations towards each other. And if it's not uneasiness, it just goes right down to a kind of vitriol towards one another, right? Like a few years ago, there was some boomers that were online, and they caused a hashtag to go viral, and the hashtag was how to confuse a millennial. Did anybody remember that one? It was funny. There was a little meme with it, and it says, how to confuse a millennial, and the meme was this 30-year-old trying to figure out how to use a phone book, right? And as you'd imagine, then the millennials shot back to the boomers, and there was this hashtag that went viral called OKBoomer, and then it got nasty, it got dark during COVID, because there was this hashtag that went viral called Farewell Boomers. And the reason is because so many boomers were dying of COVID. And so it got dark and it got nasty very quickly. And then there's been some hashtags that have gone viral regarding my generation, the Xers. And my favorite to laugh at is the OK Karen. Anybody follow the OK Karen hashtag? And if your name's Karen, this isn't about you. It's this representation of people of my generation that just don't mind calling the manager at the restaurant, right? Who unfortunately get caught on video chewing out the middle school principal for something ridiculous, right? And so my point is simply this, is there is a generation gap. There's a generation problem. And if we live into that, the generation problem is not going to build bridges, it's going to continue to build walls. But those that live in the kingdom of God, we don't see the generation gap as a problem, we see it as an opportunity. And so again, listen to how Paul frames this. He says, older men, if you're in your 40s and up, I'm going to put you in that category. You're to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, in steadfastness. Older women, likewise, are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to too much wine. They're to teach what is good, and so train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. Likewise, urge the younger men to be self-controlled. Show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works. Now, this is why generational communities are so important. And the reason I say that is because the natural reflex of humans is to isolate into our generational, people group, right? We want to be around people that look like us, talk like us, live where we live, have the same wealth status, because we get them automatically. But the problem is when we live into our generational, little hole, not only does it become an echo chamber for all sorts of really unhealthy things, but all it does is then reinforce our prejudices. And we say, this is right and that is wrong. And yet when we get among other generations that see the gospel and see the kingdom from different generations, some things begin to happen. We begin to flourish in ways we never really expected. So let me tease this out just to show you what I mean. So again, when I look at our house, I love our church because we have this pretty significant generation pipeline. And we got quite a few people I'll say in the 50s and above. I'm not going to name names, okay? I'm not going to point you out. I might look at you in the eye today, but we got this older generation with often 50 years of experience of walking with God. Of like what it means to know God and walk with God and to make a bajillion mistakes and yet see the grace of God at work. And it takes an enormous amount of humility for the older generation to open their lives to the younger generation. And the reason it takes humility to do that is because the moment you open yourself up to pour out, you open yourself up for rejection. And so enormous amount of respect for older generation to say, I'm willing to disciple, pour out, give my life like a drink offering to the younger generation. Mad props, okay? But it also takes quite a bit of humility for, let's just say, the alpha generation, the younger generation, that's the age of my children, they're adults. It takes quite a bit of humility to receive the instruction of the older generation. And the reason, I was 25 at one time, just a few years ago, and I remember I was the most arrogant person on the planet. Seriously. And the reason that was so dangerous is because I was in ministry at the time, and I had just enough Christian language to cover over my arrogance. So my humility was on top of this foundation of rotting self-sufficiency. And thankfully, I had some older guys that walked with me, and they were like, you're a moron. You don't know anything. Keep your mouth shut. Hold on to Jesus, right? And they did that with an enormous amount of grace, but it kept me from missing the ditches. Now, here's the thing that's going to be really counterintuitive for some of you. The generational flow of grace doesn't just flow in one direction. It's typically what we think. Only the older people have the wisdom. Because here's the thing. You can be a gray-headed fool. Just because you're old doesn't mean you have wisdom. Good news, there are multiple generations to give us wisdom. And here's the counterintuitive nature of it. Again, I've children who are grown adults that are part of the Alpha generation. And what I recognize is while I have wisdom that God has given me through some experience and walking with him, the younger generation, my children, they have a wisdom that is so counterintuitive. My kids, for example, I'll use my daughter, for example. She is so intuitive with technology. My son in particular too, so intuitive. And my daughter is able to see the landscape of the world in ways that I can't see it. And the reason I'm coming to an age where the cement of my life is quickly drying. And I feel more inflexible than ever. And so I need younger generation to be like, this is the landscape of the world we're living in. And here's how to tether the kingdom of God to it. So I'm grateful for the younger generation because they have a wisdom that has expired in my life. And then even more than that, the younger generation, and this is why it takes humility for the older generation to receive it, is the younger generation often, they're the ones coming in with the greatest heat for worship. They're the ones coming into the local church with a kind of unashamedness in the sufficiency of Jesus. And the older generation in a kind of shameful foolishness says, oh, they'll learn. And instead, we need to be learning from the younger generation who is not adverse to risk, who is coming in with a kind of longing for faith, a longing to do things that actually matter in life. And those of us that are a little bit older, we've become solidified in our risk management. We say, okay, this is what is okay to lose. This and no more. And yet the younger generation, because feasibly in the natural, they don't have anything to lose, they're willing to risk it all. But that's how we came into the kingdom, and that's actually how we're meant to live in the kingdom. None of this is ours. It's all the Lord's, and all of it is meant to be on the table. The backside of this is simply this, and we're almost done. When we talk about family, I recognize that for some of you, family is a weird word because you have weird family dynamics at home. I mean, it's a dumpster fire. It's one reason you're like, I don't like Thanksgiving or I don't like Christmas because your family, they're train wrecks. And then others of you on the other side of this, you have family that you love and they're good people. You're grateful to raise children around them. But here's the thing you know about some of your family. Your natural family are not going to be the ones that spur you on to greater Christ-likeness. They're not going to be the ones that spur you to greater faith and risk and a white-hot devotion to Jesus. And you love them, but you know that's not who they are. And that's why you need a spiritual family. Last is this. And I love this thought so much. And if I had time, I could talk about this for about an hour. But the last thought is this, is when you and I are in community, and we see this in Antioch, it begins to change how we think about ourselves. It doesn't just change our ambition for life and how we do life with other people, but it actually begins to change the way that we think about ourselves. Listen to verse 24. He says, since we've heard that some persons have gone out from us and troubled you with words, unsettling your minds, although we gave them no instructions, it has seemed good to us, having come to one accord. Okay, this idea of living in one accord, we typically think about it as it relates to doctrine. We're like, we need to make sure that we're in one accord with doctrine, which is true. But one accord is actually much more about the mind. We need to make sure that we're thinking rightly, that together we're believing the same thing, that we know and we confess the same things about God because we're going in the same direction. And so together, as a collective, as a people, we know we're all anchored to Jesus. And as we're all anchored to Jesus, we all have one accord. And it begins to shape the way that we think about ourselves, the way it begins to shape the way that we move forward together. Let me put it this way. This whole idea of the way that we think is actually a matter of stewardship. And I know when we talk about stewardship, typically, stewardship is a financial word, right? It's like you should be a good steward with your money. Anybody ever heard that in church? And it's like, hey, you should learn to give financially to the church. And if you're not giving financially to church, it's because you're not being a good steward. Or it also means you need to learn to save for the future. If you're not saving for the future, it's because you're not a good steward with your money. If you're not spending your money in a way that honors Jesus, you're not being a good steward. So we're managers for this thing that Jesus has given us. But here's the thing about stewardship. It means way more than it has to do with money. Stewardship is this understanding that everything that we have in life has been given to us on loan. Everything is the Lord's. Psalm 124. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. So everything that you and I have is the Lord's. And he's given you the gift of management. He's like, I want to see what you're going to do with it. I want to see how you're going to use it to honor me. But here's why this matters. One of the most valuable things that God gives us is the gift of relationship. And he's like, I want to see how you steward it. I want to see you steward that relationship. And one of the ways that we steward the relationship, really the only way we steward relationship, is if you can do it in community. Okay, let me close with this. We're living in a season right now where it has become acceptable, maybe even in vogue, to label ourselves. And the moment that you get a label, the moment you put a label on yourself, is the moment you have given yourself permission to not move past the label. Like the moment you get a label, the moment you name something, or let's say the moment you get a diagnosis, whatever from whoever, you get a diagnosis, it's often to the detriment of your soul, because in that moment you get the label, you give yourself permission to not move past the label. So if you struggle with fear or anxiety, for example, and yes. If you struggle with fear and anxiety, what I don't want you to hear is this: is if you struggle with fear and anxiety, I'm not saying you don't trust God, okay? But if you struggle with fear and anxiety, and that has become a primary label over your life, and you say, this is just who I am, and this gives me permission to not do this and this and this, and to move here and to trust God, then you've given your life and you've empowered the devil to own this season of life, and this is who you are forever. But when we have the label and we say, in this season, this may be something I'm struggling with, this may be something I'm living into, but by the power of God and in the gift of community, I can move past that label. Here's why I say this. One of the roles of community is to constantly tell you who you are. And by the way, to tell you who you're not. But if you're not in community, you don't have anybody to tell you that. And so all you do is you have the reinforcing voice of the enemy. And he is happy to reinforce that label. But you get in community, and this is so annoying, you get in community, and they're going to constantly be like, that's not who you are. And you're like, dang it. And then you live into it again, and somebody else in your group's like, but hey, that's not who you are, dummy. This is who you are. And before long, you've got more voices telling you who you are and less voices telling you who you're not. And before long, you start believing it. And in the power of community, by the power of the Holy Spirit, you move beyond the label into the very person that God's made you to be. Now, it's annoying. So like this little group over here, the Martin small group, there's like 20 of them, and they're the most annoying people on the planet. Sometimes to me they are. But to each other. But here's the thing, and I can say this with confidence. There's been more freedom that's happened in this last year in their group. I mean, like freedom in the Holy Spirit, freedom from sin, freedom from bondage, and freedom into the things of God because of the annoying nature, the annoying persistence of God over each person. And if you don't have that kind of community, what I can say is you will be perpetually stuck in the labels.